So it's been way too long since I overanalyzed something stupid. Today's victim, anime characters with bowl cuts. I started watching anime at like 13 or 14 years old, and I'm 23 now, so when I talk about my preference in characters, I'm going beyond the scope of sheer sexual attraction. And maybe that's because at 14 years old it was easier to pretend this was the realistic body for a 17-year-old. Of course, it's hypocritical of me to use JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in the thumbnail as my current preference, and avoid the fact JoJo is one of the buffest 16-year-olds out there. In fact, he's de-aged over time. But with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, I find the more outrageous and outlandish, the better. Besides, I'm not looking at JoJo as some sex symbol. Bucciarati, on the other hand. It's become an ongoing joke that every bowl-cutted character inevitably becomes my favorite. But this is a theory that's yet to be debunked. And like I said, my taste in characters has changed over time, which I think can be used to fully assess how I've grown obsessed with the bowl cut. Before we dig in, we need to start with a disclaimer. I use the phrase bowl cut fairly loosely. Not all of these are the textbook definition of bowl cuts, but they definitely foster the same aesthetic energy. For example, Kaneki Ken doesn't necessarily have a bowl cut at the start of Tokyo Ghoul, but it's certainly more of a bowl cut than when he gets the white hair and starts cracking his knuckles and being objectively more badass. And guess what? High school me liked unhinged Kaneki, while current me would find the original Kaneki reliable and charming. The golden question? Is it his personality change that makes me feel this way, or his hair change? I still enjoy partaking in edgy anime. I have grown a bit over the whole embrace the madness inside of you direction. Not to say it's bad, just that most anime I've watched in high school went that route, and now I feel a bit been there, done that. I never watched as much slice of life back in the day, however, so I think the idea of characters going on coffee dates and talking about books is wholesome, even when it doesn't end in questionably sexual cannibalism. But Kaneki is a slice-of-life guy who ended up stumbling into the wrong anime, and he goes through many changes and many versions of himself throughout the plot. And as fans of the manga and anime know, the best way to differentiate the stages of Kaneki is by, you guessed it, his hair. Hair that is most ruffled during intense scenes and neat in the lighthearted ones. It's easy to say I like nerdy and cute characters over unhinged ones, and that's why I like nerd Kaneki over unhinged Kaneki. But then why is Kurapika my favorite character in Hunter XOXO Gossip Girl Hunter?
If you do, I'm still willing to...
I'll give you one guess. Kurapika is historically one of the least reliable friends in shonen anime, and yet I am obsessed with him. Between these two Kanekis, Kurapika definitely sides with the latter, and I'll save my detailed points on Kurapika later, but I have a theory his hair is connected to his desire for revenge. Kaneki's change sees him more from a clean-cut and direct individual into someone willing to invite a bit of madness into his life. I think I've grown to admire the determined heart that so often comes with bowl-cut characters. Longer, sexier hair often comes with an equally cool carefreeness and confidence, but bowl-cut characters usually worm their way into your heart through sheer admiration of their heart, willpower, and determination. All of these characters are known for skills that shock the audience. My first anime interaction with a bowl-cut character was Naruto. While Naruto was pretty much everyone's unspoken basic favorite, my second choice when I was first watching was Neji, who kind of fits in with Kurapika, driven by justified anger and pushing away his support system in a manner I found so interesting in a character. And this is where I think character design should come into conversation. Anime, way more often than not, employs such strong use of character design. The way a character looks and is animated tells unspoken parts of the story, and Naruto is no exception. Neji's hair is long but restrained and gives off a regal feeling. In fact, Neji is aesthetically one of the most uptight-looking characters, but it works for his character. His teammate, however, manages to make even better use of character design. Despite every character in the show looking to some extent ridiculous, Rock Lee looks in-universe ridiculous, which has far more impact on a character. Rock Lee's aesthetic is actually quite telling of how he functions as a hero in this universe. I've always believed that if Naruto wasn't the protagonist of Naruto, then Rock Lee would be. I mean, he gets his own cute spin-off and it's great. Whereas Naruto is the underdog in a way he's labeled a knuckle-headed loser who doesn't know when to give up, Rock Lee is an eccentric kid with no natural talent who doesn't know when to give up. However, Naruto is a show about never giving up, so Naruto and Rock Lee, who rely on hard work to achieve their dreams, are essentially the coolest bitches ever. Rock Lee's eccentric approach to being a ninja trails back to his inability to perform ninjutsu or genjutsu, relying solely on taijutsu.
I am using taijutsu. That means no tricks. Sasuke. It is just straight martial arts, nothing more. Why you?
Not only does this make Rock Lee have to work twice as hard to be a ninja, but he's constantly being looked down upon by the long-haired, naturally talented Neji. Rock Lee, to achieve the same level of skill, has to have a twice as regimented schedule and approach to training. I think this is a fun way to look at a bowl cut, whether or not this was Kishimoto's intention. But when Rock Lee changes his hair into a bowl cut, he starts living a stricter lifestyle, pushing himself past every limit. And to the viewers, Rock Lee is drawn and animated in a different way than everyone else, kind of looking like a Mei. But this serves to demonstrate that he's given a different look because he has a different approach to his training. And we can't talk about Rock Lee's aesthetic without acknowledging that his look gets passed down. Might Guy is the first person to see not only potential, but determination inside of Rock Lee, and believes in him when no one else will.
You have a gift that Neji doesn't have. Not as flashy, but perhaps even more important, is that you have the gift of perseverance, and that's what makes you a genius too!
He then becomes the sole supporter of Lee for a while, even claiming to put his life beside him. This is why them sharing the same hair and clothing is an act of solidarity. Rock Lee's hair is more than just a fun look, it demonstrates that he'll lay his trust in his sensei, not care what others think of him, and walk his own path towards being an excellent ninja. I think Armin from Attack on Titan's bowl cut, or bowl cut adjacent haircut, works similarly for his character as Rock Lee's. I stopped reading and watching Attack on Titan a while back, but there's a hot chance Armin would be my favorite character now. And in a way, I'm vicariously watching the show through people on the internet who relentlessly post about it, so I have a general idea of who's hot and who's not right now. Mikasa used to be my favorite character because I, like I said, used to love edgy characters when I was a teenager. But if we're really focusing on hair for no reason, then I guess I could make the case that Mikasa's whole character revolves around Eren because she was quick to snip off that hair the second he suggested it. And I hope her character eventually untangles from his, because I remember her developing a lot in the manga, but I also heard that doesn't necessarily translate very well into the anime. But if that's not the case, then yeah, Armin and probably Potato Lady would be my favorites. I've seen the beginning of the series quite a few times, so I know that Armin is originally meant to be the weakling who struggles to keep up physically and emotionally with his friends, but he's also the smartest biatch there. He's quiet, but he notices details the others don't and is surprisingly a quick thinker. And because his hair is conventionally less mature than those of his counterparts, Armin's innocence is accentuated for much longer than the other characters. Once again, I stopped watching pretty early, so this could have been a very rudimentary aspect of his character, but it's still food for thought. At this point, you may be thinking every bowl cut character is an underdog who doesn't fit in with the rest of the characters, but has to prove themselves through their kind heart and determination. Kurapika sure has determination and devotion to his goals, but it's not in the same way like Rock Lee and Armin. It's a little closer to Kaneki, I suppose, but it's more like later Kaneki, which I guess is further away from bowl cut Kaneki? I don't know. And Kurapika is probably the first time I've ever been so obsessed with a character who's objectively an unreliable friend. I wouldn't say bad friend because he does care, but he's definitely someone who could easily lose himself on his path. Kurapika's hair is obviously not a bowl cut, but it's closer to that than much else. Unlike Rock Lee, Kurapika's hair is longer and looser, making him actually more similar to Neji than Lee, but it's just more bowlish. Kurapika is a reserved and cool guy, never as reactive as some of his allies, but in this way, having this shoulder-length hair that comes down the way it does is perfect for brooding in the wind. My proof?
Kurapika is now drowning in an indescribable emptiness.
If he had longer hair, it wouldn't blow as easily, and if it was shorter, there wouldn't be as much movement. I think Kurapika's hair length is intentionally the perfect length for being angsty, and I don't even think this is just the intention of the author, but of the character himself as well. In fact, I think it's the same reason he was so excessively persistent about learning how to conjure chains when talking to that guy who I thought was Gon's dad for a longer time than I should have. Kurapika places aesthetic metaphor first, so long billowing hair is an absolute must. This leads into the next bowl cut of the bunch, Yurio from Yuri on Ice, who, like everyone else on this list, is my favorite character from the show. The thing is, Yurio is a small child, so at first I'd argue his hair, which is also more bowl cut adjacent than bowl cut, is meant to stress his youth. I don't think this is wrong, but I think it both stresses his youth while simultaneously being an extra detail to include while animating. After all, this show is a sports anime that stresses the beauty of the sport, meaning movement is literally everything. Yurio's hair is long enough to stress his elegance and composure, but also a certain freedom that he obtains long before Yuri Katsuki does. Yurio's age is a key component in his character, because while the protagonist of the series is meant to be giving one last shot at his dreams at an old age of 23, which is my age, Yurio is just getting started. He's young and already considered one of the best, and while his hair is demonstrative of his grace while he's on the ice, it also shows his punk kid attitude off of the ice. I love the dual functionality of his character design, and I think it was a perfect idea for the character like this in an anime like this. So I've been excited to talk about one character in particular because I just finished JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and there is one character who has made me feel ways I haven't felt about an animated character in a very long time, and that is my man, Bucciarati. Bucciarati is an unprecedented character considering all of the anime I've watched, in the way he functions as a deuteragonist in a show that heavily relies on the importance of the titular JoJos. And while Giorno is still the most relevant character, he certainly lends a fair share of screen time to the group's leader. It's safe to say that stylistic choices play a much larger role in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure than in almost any anime, especially in its later seasons. Araki even mentioned considering fashion design had he not been a manga artist. In Golden Wind, it often feels like the snappier dressed you are, the more relevant your character growth is. Bucciarati's look is a more pumped-up version of the other characters on his team. They pay a lot to look like they don't care, but it's in a different way than celebrities. While all the hair this season looks great, I think, Bucciarati and Giorno, aka the two most prominent characters, have the best hair. And like I said, anything defined as a true bowl cut is kept close to the head. Bucciarati's hair is clean cut in a posh way, demonstrating his professionality and tendency to keep his cards close to his chest, just like he keeps his hair close to his head. I tend to forget the squad didn't originally know Bucciarati and Giorno intended to betray the boss. Bucciarati's bowl cut comes with ornamentation, which makes sense in a show like this. He has a flair for the dramatics like Kurapika, but it's not quite as angsty. He doesn't need his hair to blow in the breeze as he thinks of how sad he is. Instead, he does what any godforsaken character in this show does, and during the heat of life or death battle, he poses his little ass off. And while this season is full of posh style, Bucciarati is by far the top of it. So I think he looks like the lady who escapes from The Incredibles, who also focuses on fashion, by the way. His sharp style reflects his personality more than anything else. Bucciarati is a sharp and direct person, which really shines through in his angular manner of dressing. Opposite of him would be someone younger and more unsure of himself like Fugo, who has longer, less tamed hair, and a less sharp manner of dressing. And while I absolutely think I'm stretching with most of these interpretations, I do think JoJo's is trying to accomplish storytelling via its style and therefore hair. I mean, think of Diamond is Unbreakable. The only thing that sets off Josuke is people insulting his hair, and Koichi gets a much more outrageous hairstyle as soon as his power starts to increase. Hair can even be related to stands in some cases. In a show that places a good amount of emphasis on appearance, Bucciarati is by far one of the most camp, high-fashion characters. I absolutely think his bowl cut is meant to be a nod towards the more runway-ready side of fashion, and it's meant to stress his leadership. And I knew going into this season that he would be my favorite the second I saw his hair, but when I watched the episodes, I was blown away by how much I loved him. It's the power of the bowl cut, man. And by no means is this type of character limited to anime. Coconut Head, He-Man, me when I was 3 years old. And while this haircut is often the identifier, each character's reason for having it, be it practical or metaphorical, is always going to be different. I think you see it more in animation than in live action, because it's easier to rely on more outlandish designs in animation. This isn't to say it can't be done, but it's just not as common. Especially because actual bowl cuts don't look silly like they do in animation. Real-life bowl cuts actually look quite nice. But that's because with animation, it's usually more strict in movement and design, which takes out any natural aspect to the look there would have been. Overall, I don't necessarily think there's a personal reason I always like characters with bowl cuts. I just think they're always given a little bit of love extra from the authors, and that goes a long way. But more often than not, it makes them the fan favorites for different reasons. And I'm excited because there are still so many bowl cut characters I've yet to watch, and I eagerly await seeing how they wow me and inevitably become my favorite.